In January of 2019, Orqa made a gigantic splash in the FPV community by announcing the Orqa FPV.one, which they promised would be the best FPV goggle anybody had ever made. In fact, they promised to do something with FPV goggles that the market leader, Fat Shark, just wasn't willing to do, and that is release an ultra high-end FPV goggle at a never-before-seen price point that finally delivered everything that people have been asking for, begging for, and not getting. Now it's November 2019, and the Orqa FPV.one is finally here. But a lot has changed. While Orqa was going through the inevitable struggles of a new company bringing their first FPV goggle to market, Fat Shark leveraged their experience and their supply chain to bring the HDO2. And the HDO2 has the exact same OLED panels as the Orqa. It has the same resolution, the same field of view. It has Fat Shark's name and reputation behind it. And it is $150 cheaper than the Orqa. And as if that wasn't bad enough, DJI released the DJI Digital HD FPV System. And some people are saying that that signals the beginning of the end for analog FPV in its entirety. And that means this may be the most significant FPV goggle review that I've ever done. Because the question we're going to tackle is not just why should you pay $650 for an Orqa when you could pay $500 for an HDO2, $150 less. The question that we really have to tackle is why in today's day and age would you pay $500 or $650 for any analog goggle when for nearly the same amount of money, you could be going HD? I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. The first thing we got to do in this review is talk about the price difference between the Orqa FPV.one and the HDO2. And as you watch this entire review, one of the questions you're going to be asking yourself is, why would I pay more for the Orqa than the HDO2? The Orqa comes with these two antennas. This one's an Omni. This one is an 8 dBi patch antenna. The Fat Shark HDO2 doesn't come with antennas, so that gives the Orqa let's say it's a $45 offset to its price. Orqa also gives you this battery pack. Fat Shark gives you an 18650 case with no batteries in it, and by my math, that gives the Orqa maybe another $5 advantage. Although if you prefer to use 18650s, you may. It is kind of a cool pack. It does this little Cylon thing to check the level. Anyway, so let's say that the Orqa is not $150 more expensive. Let's say that it's only $100 more expensive when you factor in all the things it comes with. The other thing Orqa is doing to help offset the price difference between the goggles is for all the Kickstarter backers, all the pre-orders, and everybody who orders before the end of 2019, they're going to send you the FPV Connect module for free. This is a digital interface module that lets the goggles connect to Wi-Fi and do like live stream, update firmware, and other cool things that haven't been invented yet. Orqa says that this module will sell for about, let's say, $80 is what they estimated. And based on that, all of that package, that actually brings the Orqas down to only like $20 more expensive than the HDO2. If you're watching this video after approximately New Year's 2020, though, that $80 FPV Connect module is not being included for free. At least they haven't announced any plans to do that. And the price difference between the goggles is closer to maybe $100. And like any goggle review, the first thing we're going to mention is the screen resolution and the field of view. The screen has 1280 by 960 resolution, that is 4:3 aspect ratio, and it's got a 44-degree field of view. The IPD adjustment on the Orqas is from 56 to 74 millimeters. Orqa has advertised this as the widest IPD on the market, but that was before the HDO2s came out with an advertised 54 to 76, an additional 2 millimeters on either end. You know, the build quality on these is pretty good overall. Like, there's no like flex in the shell. The module covers are snap in snugly when there's no play, but like, it just sounds like something I 3D printed at home. By the way, I have a 3D printer now, and I'm going to start making content about 3D printing here on the channel. So if you're interested in that, definitely make sure you are subscribed and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of that content as it comes out. Since Orqa is aiming to be the premium FPV goggle on the market, it makes sense that they partnered with the premium FPV module on the market, RapidFire. Orqa comes with a module bay cover for the RapidFire module. It's kind of weird that they're partnering with RapidFire since Immersion RC and Fat Shark are kind of sister companies, but okay. If you got any other module that you want to use, there are STL files published for door covers that you can print at home on a 3D printer. But the partnership between Orqa and RapidFire goes even deeper than just shipping with a module bay door. Until now, modules have never really interfaced with the goggle in a meaningful way. The only interface that the goggle and the module had was the channel up-down buttons, and it was a very, very rudimentary interface. Basically, all the goggle could do was tell the module what channel it wanted it to be on. If you're running RapidFire with the Orqa goggles, they can actually interface via, it's a protocol called SPI, and it's just a generic digital data transfer protocol. Now, as of now, the only effect that this really has is that your freaking channel change buttons work correctly. In other words, on many goggles, if you change channel via the joystick and then change channel via the buttons, they don't sync up. They're confused, the goggle anyway. But with a RapidFire and an Orqa, the channel buttons will always work correctly. But this actually speaks to Orqa's design philosophy and their intent not just to be a goggle that, when was the last time you got a firmware update for your Fat Shark goggles? Yes, Immersion RC did once in all of history release a firmware update for the DVR, but the actual goggles, they don't get firmware updates. Fat Shark releases a goggle and then that's just it. That's how it works. And if you have a complaint about the way it works, tough cookies. You can just buy the next one. The Orqa goggles include a frankly vastly overpowered microprocessor for what they're actually doing at this time. And Orqa's intent is that they'll be able to update the goggles with new features via firmware updates. In fact, it's 2 weeks after release and there's already a firmware update fixing a few bugs, adding some features to the DVR, and so on. And this goes back to the SPI interface to the RapidFire module because, like, one of the things I have always asked for in a goggle, why can't the goggle and the module, like, search for channels that are not being used and prevent you from stomping on other people when you power up your video transmitter? Why can't they communicate to the VTX and all act as a unified system? Well, the ability of the Orqa goggles to take firmware updates, to have a lot of processing power, and to interface with the module via SPI, and to interface with other stuff via Wi-Fi, that's something that doesn't exist today, but it is something that could exist if you're using the Orqa goggles, and it's something that, well, first of all, Fat Shark has just not shown any interest in actually doing, but second of all, it's questionable whether the Fat Shark goggles could even support such functionality. Here on the left side of the goggle, there is a plug for either a headset, so you can use headphones if you want to, or a microphone input. And if you're like me and you want to record your voice or ambient sounds while you're flying, you can plug a microphone into this input and use that either in addition to or instead of the audio from your craft. That's pretty cool, although some people have noted it does mean that this plug is not compatible with the earbuds that most people are using. So if you've got one of the mono earbuds that you're using with Fat Sharks, it probably will not work with this plug. Orqa has said that they may release an adapter to make it compatible, but that was the only way that they could get this microphone input, headset output function to work properly. This here is the head tracker plug, if you're using a head tracker. Over here on the right side, we've got the AV input and the HDMI input. So it does have an HDMI input. You can use it with a Bifrost digital ground station or any other digital ground station. There aren't any other digital ground stations. You can use it to plug into your computer as well. If you want to play simulator, it'll work for that. The AV plug, I said it was an AV input, and some of you are wondering if that was if I misspoke. Most goggles have an input and output in the same jack. So if you want to input a signal from a ground station, you plug it into that plug. If you want to output a signal to a DVR, like this is the Immersion RC PowerPlay DVR that some people are getting nowadays. It's just a really better DVR than is built into the Fat Sharks. If you had something like this, you would plug it into the AV plug on your Fat Sharks. But that is not going to work with the Orcas. This is an input only, not an output. And the reason they said they did that was that they found that there was a degradation of video quality when they made it both an input and an output. Here's some side-by-side footage of the Orqa and the Fat Shark HDO2 DVR. And I'm actually going to start with a still frame because when this stuff gets moving, and especially when YouTube starts mangling it, it really may dilute the differences between them. Nevertheless, I know you guys want to see moving videos, so I am going to show it to you. But before we do that, just take a look at the sky in this still frame. And notice that on the Fat Shark, there is all this macro blocking in the sky, whereas on the Orqa, the details of the sky are smooth. Another thing the Orqa does better than the Fat Shark is that it records every scan line. The Fat Shark DVRs don't want to deal with deinterlacing the signal, and that means essentially that they discard every other scan line, and that means that they have half the vertical resolution. Here's what I mean. Look at the know-it-all letters in the OSD. Look at the diagonal line of the handrail. And look at, over on the lower right corner of the screen, look at the tree branches. Okay, you got a picture of what that looks like? Okay, now here is what the Fat Shark looks like. Okay, so yeah. What I wanted to do by zooming in is I want you guys to see that objectively the Orqa DVR is doing a much, much better job of recording the image. Because when we zoom back out to full screen and show you moving footage, I think the difference is going to be a lot less stark, and I really wanted to give Orqa a fair shake to succeed where it just has objectively done better. Well, I think it's time to look at some of the features of the Orqa that you can only see by actually looking inside the screen. And in order to do that, we're going to have to turn them on. And what? The battery is plugged in, but the Orcas are not powered on? Yes, the Orcas have a power button, and that bit was a lot more poignant before the HDO2s came out, which also have a power button. The power button on the Orqa works in 3 modes. You can set the mode in the menu, in the goggles. One of the modes is just plug, unplug. So if you like the way that Fat Sharks have done it all these years, you can set the Orcas to work like that. One of the modes is just press once to turn on, press once to turn off. That is how they ship, and I recommend that you change it because it is way, way too easy to accidentally, like you're fumbling around and you accidentally press the power button and turn your goggles off when you didn't mean to. The way that I prefer to have it set, it's similar to how DJI's work, is press once, twice to turn on, and once, twice to turn off. The receiver menu lets you enable or disable the rapid fire SPI interface. It also gives you access to a channel table if you want just a real quick check of which channel is which. You can also select the channel from there. If you're using the rapid fire SPI interface, you just highlight a channel and select it, and the rapid fire switches to that channel. That's pretty cool. Input source can be set to HDMI, AV, or receiver, and it comes set to auto detect by default. When you plug in AV or HDMI, it'll take over, or you can manually set one of them. You might have just heard the goggle fan turn on. The Orcas have an automatic goggle fan. When they heat up, the fan turns on, and when they cool down, if you're using them in the Arctic, if they are cool enough, the fan will automatically turn off. The standby mode lets you enable or disable the goggles' standby feature. So the goggles have a sensor right here that detects when they are on your face, and when they're off your face for a certain amount of time, it'll automatically turn off the screens and power down the module to save battery life. The next 2 menu options relate to the head tilt alarm. You know that problem you get where you, while you're flying FPV, you kind of drop your head and now your directional antenna is pointed down at the ground and it's not really doing you any good? You can also tilt up. Finally, the battery option lets you configure, there's a button on the outside of the goggles that you press to bring up the battery voltage so you can know when your goggle battery is getting low. And when you press that, you can set the position that it'll display on screen so that it doesn't interfere with the rest of your OSD. This will also automatically pop up when the battery starts to get low, so you can just keep track of like how close you are to actually like killing your battery. As long as we're in the goggles, let's also take a look at the DVR menu. I know you guys want to see that. The DVR is accessed from the right-hand joystick, and here it is. We have the choice to auto-delete files when the SD card gets full. That's just loop recording, where it deletes the oldest files to keep recording the new ones. We have the option to mix in the external microphone with the audio from the quad, and you can see the way I've got it set up is with 0% audio from the quad because I don't run a microphone on any of mine, so the audio is always just static. One DVR feature that I know you guys are going to ask about is auto record, and for the time being, there doesn't appear to be any auto record in the goggles. That is a feature that Orqa has said they plan to add in a future firmware update, but for now, you're just going to have to hit that record button if you want to get your DVR recording. Now let's compare the image quality of these goggles to each other. And you might think that's kind of pointless since they have the same OLED panel in them. Shouldn't they look pretty much the same? When I first put these goggles on my face and alternated them back and forth, I thought the HDO2s looked better. Not by miles, but definitely better. But I didn't want to leave that just to my subjective eye. So I put a gray ramp test pattern in both of the goggles, and I discovered possibly what the reason was. It looks like that the Fat Sharks on their middle settings, they're crushing the blacks slightly and blowing out the whites slightly. And so you're losing just a little bit of dynamic range, but you get a little bit more pleasing image. Whereas the test pattern in the Orqas was just like perfect. You got every single degradation of black and white. And if you change the contrast or brightness even a little bit, you start to lose it. It looks like the Orqa has finely tuned their image to be sort of perfect in that it shows the whole dynamic range, whereas Fat Shark seems to be tuning their image just a little bit more for a striking and pleasing image that leaves just a little bit of information in the shadow and the highlights missing. So what I did, of course, in order to make this as sort of fair as possible, was I adjusted the settings on both of the goggles to look as similar as possible in this gray ramps input. So now that we've tuned the goggles to be as close as possible using an objective test pattern, let's take a look at what they actually look like when they receive an FPV feed. And we're going to be working off a static FPV feed here because it lets us compare the goggles more accurately. And when I first looked at these goggles, using the objective gray ramp test, I thought that the images looked pretty poor, really washed out. So the next thing I did is I threw the test pattern out the window and I just put the goggles on my face and I tuned the image to be how I thought it looked the best. I used the dark area in the grill of my car as a metric for the black level. I turned the black level down until I started to lose detail in that dark area, and I used the sky as a metric for the white level. I turned the white level up until the sky started to get a little bit washed out. I actually don't care if the sky is a little washed out. It gives me a little bit more contrast in the rest of the image. And here are the results. Now, because the GoPro does not perfectly capture what your eye sees, I feel obligated to tell you guys, my opinion is still that the Fat Sharks look just a tiny bit more pleasant. I don't know why, even after tweaking them so they're as similar as possible. Maybe it comes down to the fact that the Fat Sharks let you change the power level with which the OLED is driven, literally making the OLED brighter, not just in the sense of changing the white or the black level, but literally just making it output more light. This is not something that the Orqa lets you adjust. Now, I've got the Fat Shark on its default output power level, but maybe Fat Shark has tuned the OLED to be just a little bit brighter than the one in the Orqa. That's just speculation. But both images look really good, and either of them would give an acceptable image, but I personally have to give the slight edge to the Fat Shark. One of the first things I noticed about the Orqa's image when I looked in the goggles was that it does have some pincushion distortion. What that means is that the center of the edges are kind of squeezed in just a little bit. I've done my best to capture this here in the GoPro. It's not exact. You can see, like, in this GoPro image, the top of the image looks relatively straight, and the bottom of the image, the way that it's bowed in, is, I would say, just a little bit exaggerated. It's not a deal breaker, but it is a little bit distracting, at least to me. Orqa have even acknowledged this, and what they say is that they wanted to have a larger, more immersive image, so they set their optics up with just a little bit more magnification than you find in the HDO2. You get a larger image, but a little bit of distortion. If you don't like that, you can go in the menus, and in the image settings, there's an option for supersize mode. Supersize mode, basically, when it's on, it means that you're using all of the pixels of the screen, and when you turn it off, it just basically chops off a tiny bit of pixels at the corners of the screen to try to just make that a little bit less apparent. I asked, well, why don't you also fix not just the corners, but also the bowing? And they said that they could do that in a future firmware update. They just didn't decide to do that in this one. What else differentiates these guys objectively from the Fat Sharks? They have diopter slots. The Fat Sharks have built-in focus adjustment from +2 to -6 diopter. And if you have a strong diopter, more than -6, I'm 6.25 in one eye and 6.75 in the other eye, with about 0.25 to 0.75 of astigmatism, if that means anything to you. So I'm actually more than -6, and the HDO2s work fine for me. If you have very strong astigmatism or a very strong prescription, then you probably want diopter inserts like these little guys, and they will slide right into these slots. In fact, you may already own some, as I do. The Orqa comes with two different styles of faceplate foam. This is the leatherette style that many people seem to love, and this is the neoprene style that I love. And as far as I know, Newbie Drone was the first to bring this to market. I don't know if Orqa is buying this through Newbie Drone or just making it's just neoprene, so it's not a big deal. But this I really like, and it actually comes in two different thicknesses of the neoprene. And that brings us to the end of the video, and as always, the question, which one should you buy? And that question has never been harder, because both of these are really, really excellent goggles at a really, really high price point. Hopefully, based on all the information I've given you in this video, you have already made up your mind. But let me try and sum it up for you. Some of you are going to decide just based on the looks. Some of you love the looks of the Orqa. Some of you hate it. Okay, we'll get that out of the way. The price. The Orqa is more expensive, no matter how you slice it. Orqa would like you to add in X number of dollars of bonus stuff that they're giving you and say, oh, it's not so much more expensive, but it is more expensive. It's worth pointing out that Immersion RC PowerPlay DVR that I showed you, that alone some people are spending $100 on. And the Orqa's DVR basically does, I don't think the Orqa's DVR is 60 FPS like the PowerPlay, but the Orqa's DVR, if you're a potential buyer of a PowerPlay, that actually really might close the gap between the Orqas and the Fat Sharks. As far as image quality goes, I do give a slight edge to the Fat Sharks. Even after tweaking the image, I felt like the Fat Shark was just a little bit better. And the lack of barrel distortion or pincushion distortion on the Fat Sharks, to me, I prefer that. It's a small thing, but I do think the edge is there, at least for me. Maybe it's not for you. What the Orqas really bring to the table, though, is this drive to innovate and to respond to the needs of the community and to produce things that nobody has even thought to ask for. This little module that you can put, the Wi-Fi module, this thing can connect to a DJI drone and control the camera gimbal on a DJI drone by turning your head. Nobody thought that there's other things that Orqa have told me about that I'm not allowed to talk about yet, which are things they want to do with these goggles that, like I said before, not only maybe Fat Shark goggles can't do them, but Fat Shark doesn't even really seem to want to do them. The final question that we have to ask is, oh yeah, remember me? In a world where you could get a set of DJI goggles for about $650, and to be fair, the Air units are a lot more. They're $160, so that's a different thing. But by the time you're at the $500, $600 price point, you gotta start thinking, should I just be going DJI? And I'm not telling you that. I'm just telling you what people are telling me. A lot of people who are getting into FPV are saying, should I even bother with analog? Now, again, I won't pretend to answer that question for you. There's no doubt that high definition, the DJI experience, is a very, very compelling experience. There are people who say, I'm done with analog. I'm never looking back. Why did I waste my time? Now, you may not be one of those people. You may still be committed to analog, in which case, whichever one of these goggles you like best based on this review, there's a link down in the video description, and it's an affiliate link, and I put a lot of work into this review, and I sure would appreciate it if when you go buy the goggle, you click that affiliate link and let me get that sweet commission. But the other thing to keep in mind is these goggles are not necessarily just analog goggles, because Fat Shark has the Bite Frost digital HD system that is the sort of non-DJI monolithic digital HD system, and it's going to work with these goggles, and it works with these goggles as well. And these goggles let you keep doing analog and do digital, and who knows what else is coming. Orqa, and this is not a case where Orqa has let me in on some secret and I can't tell you about it, but Orqa has said that they plan for this goggle to be a part of the digital HD future, and that's why it has high resolution screens and an HDMI input and all the stuff that it does. So don't necessarily think that just because you want to go digital someday means that you can't choose to go with one of these goggles today. The point of these goggles, yes, the Orqas, and yes, we have to also acknowledge the Fat Sharks, is that they are great goggles today, but also great goggles in the future. Although, the fast processor on the Orqas and the software upgradability will probably give them an edge in terms of what they can bring to the table compared to the Fat Sharks. Now, I can finally breathe. This has been such a hard video to even start reviewing goggles this expensive when so many people out there are struggling to just get to $300. Yikes. And then to be able to, with two goggles this freaking good, and then this guy staring over your shoulder. I'm so glad it's over. I hope that you learned a lot. If you stuck around this long, thank you so much for sticking around. And just one more reminder that yes, this is my full-time job, helping you guys with this information. And yes, I have a Patreon. Yes, I have affiliate links, and it means a whole lot to me if you use them. That's gonna do it. What do you think? You buying Orqa? You done with Fat Shark? Why are you buying Orqa if you're buying it? Do you just think it's a better goggle, or are you just kind of mad at Fat Shark? Why are you sticking with Fat Shark if you're sticking with Fat Shark? I want to know. I really do. This is not just a trick to get you to leave comments so my analytics go up. Tell me in the comments what your thoughts are, because I just care. I want to know. All right. I am out of here. Thank you guys so much for watching. Happy flying.